Hi, my name is Lucia and I am an NDIS registered support coordinator, and today I wanted to talk about funding periods. Before we start, I would really appreciate a quick like and subscribe. Thank you. So let's recap. Funding periods have been introduced as part of the NDIS legislative changes back in October 2024. And since then, NDIA have started to implement these funding periods in the new plans. The funding periods promise to introduce a better measure for participants to manage their funding. And these do not actually take away from the funding allocation for the plan period. Instead, they kind of serve as additional checkpoints that are in place to ensure that the participants' funding will last them until the end of the plan period. Especially, this is beneficial in cases where changes of circumstances is not required for a participant. These funding periods will look different for each person, and what do I mean by that? Let's have a look at an example. A participant has received a new 12 months plan, and in the plan, the funding is divided into 3 monthly funding periods. That means that whatever allocation participant has for the 3 months is all they can use within those 3 months and can't dip into the next 3 months of funding. However, if the participant doesn't use up all of the funding in the allocated period, any of that funding will roll over to the next funding period. Here's a visual. Let's imagine that a participant has been approved 10,000 for core supports in a 12-month plan. For each funding period, it will be 2,500. Let's say the participant will use that towards support workers, cleaners, maybe meal delivery if that was approved in their plan, and by the end of the funding period, they have not used all of the 2,500. Let's say 1,200 remains. This will then roll over to the next funding period. And if the next plan period, same thing happens, where some funding is left over, everything will roll over to the following funding period, and so on until the end of the plan. On the other hand, if all of the funding has been exhausted before the funding period ends, accessing funds from the next funding period is not permitted, and so the funding will renew only when the next funding period starts. I did say earlier that funding periods will look different for each person because funding periods can be shorter, let's say monthly periods, or longer, such as 6-month period. But they also do not have to equal in funding allocations and can depend on participants' circumstances, such as that a larger funding allocation during first period to cover setup costs for any supports, onboarding, or burst-off linkage activities, such as being linked to a support worker, occupational therapist, things like that. So later periods can then taper to a steadier rhythm once supports have been linked to the participant. So why the funding periods have been introduced? Well, NDIS website states that funding periods were introduced because participants themselves are saying it is hard to budget during plans that last 1, 2, or 3 years, increasing the risk of overspending or running out of funds. NDIS website also states that these were introduced as part of mitigating some of the risks associated with overspending. They say that they would like to prevent general exploitation, fraud, or harm. And personally, I am kind of leaning towards liking these funding periods precisely because of the rigidity and ability to better calculate and manage participants' funding as a support coordinator. As a support coordinator, may I underline, this will hopefully assist with better planning of the supports, ensuring consistency, and progressing towards participants' well-being goals. I also think that this may help providers be a little bit more consistent with invoicing for supports, because providers are not required to bill under strict periodic periods. Some can claim at weekly, fortnightly, monthly intervals, and there are also some that invoice sporadically, but these are a bit more extreme and less frequent examples of provider bad practice, and this is not really the point of the video. But nonetheless, while these funding periods could be great for providers to adhere to stricter managing of supports, invoicing, and budgeting, it is not about us. On the other side, while I recognize that some greeted this change for ease of budgeting their supports, it is less than ideal for a person that has fluctuating conditions and symptoms, which may require a period of higher than usual supports. What is going to happen then? Continuity of supports will be out of the window until next period, and of course that presents individualized risks in cases where no family or friends can provide any informal support and step in. It also increases the administration load and likely stress for the participant, where they and/or their support coordinator have to deal with cancellations, rescheduling, rebooking, and having the conversations with providers who may not be able to put those supports on hold and allocate those spots to other participants. So let me know in the comments below how the funding periods have affected you so far, or someone you support. I am always interested in reading and learning from other people's experiences. So the way to approach funding periods is at the planning and meeting. The participant or their support coordinator should outline their pattern of need, what a stable week looks like, what a flare or crisis looks like, what the support implementation timeline is, how many weeks would it take for a participant to be linked with required supports, and predictable spikes such as school holidays, seasonal symptoms, and so on. The participant or support coordinator should ask the NDIS planner to walk through the allocation per period and agree on the period profile in advance, whether it would equal, whether it should be front-loaded, or longer, shorter periods. So get clear on the per period amounts the participants can sustainably spend, how providers will invoice against those amounts. Also get clear with your support coordinator or key worker what steps should be followed when the spending is too high mid-period. That way you are able to recognize this and adjust supports accordingly. But also, don't forget to document these in the service agreements so all parties are aligned in the new way of using funding based on the funding periods that were assigned to the participant. Now, if it is evident that the participant is constantly running out of the funding or skipping essential supports to avoid running out or running low on funds, that should serve as an indication that the current structure or total budget is not really working. In such cases, the participant or their support coordinator should apply for a change of circumstance, especially when the needs have changed, the support intensity has increased, and risks have escalated, or the period profile is mismatched to the real-world use. So bring a simple spend log, notes on high needs weeks, provide letters, hours and frequency that supports are required at, and any clinical updates. While the reassessment is in progress, maybe triage supports, reschedule non-critical items into the next period, and maintain proactive communication with plan manager and providers to prevent rejected invoices and preserve continuity of essential supports. So the takeaway points are: you cannot bring funds forward. If you burn through the period early, you must wait until the next funding period opens for more funds to be available. Unspent funds, funds that have not been spent, roll forward within the same plan to the next funding period. If you are under in period 1, you benefit in period 2, and so on. Funding periods apply regardless of management type. If you know that you will require increased episodic supports, consider planning heavier weeks against known underused funding or where the funding has not been fully utilized in a funding period, or ask for the periods to be profiled specific to your support needs. Funding periods do not block a change of circumstances. If the plan is not fit for purpose, request a plan reassessment. The price guide rules still apply, so period exhaustion does not convert non-claimable items into claimable ones. If you are a provider, actually look at the spend to date against the period, not just the whole of plan. Build that check into the billing cycle, and some of the softwares actually already provide this type of support. So the practical tips for participants and providers: set a simple monthly cap per support type that fits inside the period allocation. Add approximately 10 to 15% buffer for public holidays, cancellations, or rate changes. I would also recommend monitoring spending on fortnightly basis, and also put period dates in calendars. Update service agreements with your providers where needed to reference the funding period structure, so everyone is aligned on delivery and billing. And of course, document hospital stays or acute episodes, and this will help explain overspend patterns and support reassessment requests. So here you go. Hopefully I have provided some useful information in this video. Please share with other providers if you think that will save them a little bit of nerve cells. And if I have missed anything out, let me know in the comments below. Again, I appreciate if you take the time to subscribe and like the video and also share with others. Thank you so much.